You sold the car? Brittany, my daughter-in-law, snapped, her voice shrill with disbelief. Ellen didn't flinch. It was never yours to question. Jason, her son, stared at the notarized title, his mother's name staring back like a verdict. No warning? You just sold it? Ellen's voice stayed steady. You asked me to take the bus, so I took back the steering wheel. And that's when they realized Mom hadn't lost her mind. She'd found her line. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The kettle clicked off just as Brittany stepped into the in-law unit, her voice already smiling before Ellen even turned around. Morning! I made coffee upstairs. Figured I'd bring you a cup before it gets cold. Ellen blinked, surprised by the rare gesture. That's thoughtful. Brittany's smile widened like a well-rehearsed cue. Also, just a quick thing. My mom's flying in tonight. Ellen nodded slowly, stirring a touch of honey into her tea. I remember. You mentioned she's staying for the week. Right, Brittany said, stepping closer. So, I was wondering if you'd be okay taking the bus for a bit. Just while she's here, you know how much she hates ride shares, and she's not great with walking distances. Ellen set her spoon down quietly. You mean, not using the car? Well, Brittany said lightly, it's just for a few days. You don't really go far anyway, do you? The question hung in the air, coated in polite condescension. Ellen stared at her cup. She didn't answer right away, didn't trust what would come out first, her words or the heat rising in her chest. The car's in great shape, Brittany continued, and Sharon deserves to relax a little. She raised 3 kids by herself, you know. Total powerhouse. Ellen's smile was thin but practiced. How admirable. Brittany didn't notice the edge, or didn't care. So we're good? Ellen nodded once. Of course. Brittany leaned in, kissed the air near Ellen's cheek and said, You're the best, before breezing out like she'd just solved world peace. The door shut softly behind her. Ellen turned toward the window, where the car sat in its usual spot, gleaming, silent, loyal. A 2014 silver hybrid, well-maintained, quietly dependable. Jason had given it to her 2 months after her husband passed. So you don't have to wait on anyone, he'd said. Dad would have wanted you free. Now it sat untouched, waiting to be borrowed by a woman who'd never heard his laugh. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and sat down with her tea, but it didn't taste right. Later that day, she stood at the window again and watched Brittany and Jason loading a weekender bag into the back seat of the hybrid. Sharon emerged from the house in a pressed linen blazer, all smiles and perfume. They laughed about something. Ellen couldn't hear it. But she watched Jason hand over the keys. Not temporarily, not reluctantly. He handed them over like the gesture had no weight. Ellen didn't wave. She stepped back from the window and closed the curtain with calm fingers. That night, after everyone was asleep, Ellen sat at her desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the one she hadn't looked into since last tax season, and thumbed through a neatly labeled accordion folder. Bank statements, insurance forms, retirement disbursements, and then, behind them, a manila envelope with a rubber band stretched twice around it. She slid it free, heart even and steady. Inside, the original car title. Her name typed clean across the top. No cosigners, no liens, no second guesses. Jason had transferred it properly, legally, thoroughly. Ellen placed the paper gently on her desk, smoothing the creases. Ownership, she thought, wasn't about possession. It was about intention. And intention had memory. She remembered picking up the car from the dealership, Jason walking beside her, still red-eyed from the funeral. He'd squeezed her hand and said, he'd want you to keep moving, not wait for anyone to remember you. She hadn't waited, but they had forgotten. She turned on her desk lamp, pulled out a fresh notebook, and jotted a line beneath tomorrow's date, find dealership contact, confirm appraisal hours. Then she tucked the title back into the envelope and slid it under her pillow. Not for safety, for certainty. Because in the morning she'd start the process they didn't see coming, and when they noticed, if they noticed, she wouldn't be asking for the keys. The envelope didn't leave Ellen's nightstand. She'd woken up twice just to check it was still there, not out of fear, but reverence. That paper, creased and silent, held the truth no one else seemed interested in. The car wasn't borrowed. It was hers. Not by favor, not by accident, by deed. Ownership, she thought, was quieter than people realized. It didn't always come with applause or parking preferences. Sometimes it just sat tucked in a drawer, waiting for someone to remember who paid for it. The morning sun broke gently across her small table, warming her teacup and casting thin lines through the curtains. She sipped slowly, watching the hybrid sparkle outside like it had something to prove. Jason had given her that car after the funeral. She could still feel the vinyl seatbelt pulling across her chest as they drove off the lot together. Him silent, her pretending to know which buttons to push. "Dad would have wanted you to stay mobile," he'd said. "You don't need to ask anyone for a ride." He meant it then. She didn't doubt that. But years passed. Brittany arrived, and somehow Ellen's mobility had become a group discussion. Now she was apparently gracious enough to give up the vehicle for a guest visit, a woman who hadn't even walked through the garden yet, let alone peeled ice off that windshield in February. Brittany's mother Sharon arrived later that morning, escorted up the front walkway like visiting royalty, all white slacks and designer luggage. Brittany all but ran to the door, arms outstretched, phone already in selfie mode. "She's here," Brittany sang, snapping a picture with her mother mid-hug. From her unit, Ellen watched through the side window. Sharon's hair was salon fresh, her nails glinted with pale pink polish. Jason stood nearby, holding open the front door like a concierge. When Sharon stepped inside, Brittany clapped lightly and announced, "You're not lifting a finger this week. You're our queen." Ellen heard it through the thin drywall. Queen. She raised Jason without child support, without family help, balanced evening shifts at the shelter with weekend coursework, stretched every dollar like a paper napkin across a table full of need, but there'd never been clapping. Never a throne, just grocery receipts and cold leftovers and the occasional Mother's Day brunch. Later that afternoon, Brittany popped into Ellen's doorway without knocking. "Mom's settling in great. She just loves the place." Ellen nodded politely. "Oh, and thank you again for being flexible about the car. I mean, she raised 3 kids. She deserves a break." Ellen smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough to let the words bounce off. After Brittany left, she pulled the envelope from her nightstand drawer again. Her name was there, full, unabridged, undisputed. No co-owner, no lease, no asterisk, just Ellen Margaret Walker. She pulled her laptop closer, opened a browser, and typed in the dealership's name. The same one where she'd signed those papers 7 years ago. The same one Jason had insisted had excellent resale ethics. There was a bright orange button in the top corner. Request an appraisal. She clicked it. Up popped a form. Name, phone, VIN number. Ellen walked quietly to the cabinet where she kept her records. Within a minute, she had the VIN memorized, the date of purchase logged, and the title folded neatly beside her. She filled out the form carefully, like one signs a postcard they know they'll never see again. At the bottom, it asked for a preferred appointment time. She typed, Tuesday, 9:45 a.m., Walker E. Before hitting submit, she paused. Outside, the car sat like it always had, clean, neutral, loyal. But this time, she didn't look at it with resignation. She looked at it like a chess piece. She pressed confirm appointment. Ellen didn't sleep much the night after scheduling the appraisal. Her mind didn't race. It recalculated. A slow, steady hum of shifting pieces. She watched headlights sweep across her window in the early hours, knowing one of them belonged to her car, and knowing no one inside that house realized they were driving something they didn't own. By morning, she'd made peace with the bus timetable. She folded her scarf neatly, packed her tote with granola bars for the kids at the community center, and waited by the stop at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Fog curled against the curb like steam off a teacup. She stood quietly in her gray pea coat, alone except for the sparrows lining the fence. Sharon had left earlier, driven off with Brittany riding shotgun, the hybrid's engine purring smugly as it disappeared toward the mall. They hadn't offered Ellen a ride. No surprise. Brittany had poked her head into the in-law unit before they left, just to say, "Hope the bus isn't late? Text me if you need help navigating the app." Moments later, Jason appeared by the side door, travel mug in hand, half-dressed in business casual, and blinking against the light. "Hey, Mom," he called gently, walking toward her. "Just for the record, it's only for the week. The car thing." Ellen blinked once, hands folded loosely in front of her. "I figured," she said, her voice even. He smiled, almost sheepishly. "It's just easier, you know, while Sharon's here. She doesn't do well with public transit." Ellen gave a small nod, neither agreeing nor objecting. "I suppose I do." Jason hesitated, long enough to say more, but instead he retreated with a "Thanks, Mom," tossed over his shoulder like loose change. The bus rounded the corner. 2 minutes later, Ellen stepped aboard with a calm greeting, nodded at the driver, Calvin, and tapped her card. He squinted at her, surprised. "Well, haven't seen you in a minute, Miss Ellen. Didn't you used to drive that nice hybrid?" She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I still do," she murmured. Calvin chuckled, assuming she meant it as a joke. She didn't correct him. The bus exhaled its brakes and rolled on. Ellen took a window seat and watched the neighborhood pass by, a landscape of neatly trimmed hedges, blue recycling bins, and mailboxes shaped like farm animals. The bus smelled of vinyl, old coffee, and wet winter jackets. Each stop delivered a new flicker of motion: toddlers herded by frazzled parents, teenagers glued to phones, a delivery worker cradling his head against the glass. Ellen sat quietly, the rhythm of the ride oddly familiar. She'd done this before. Through 2 jobs, through Jason's childhood. She could measure her entire working life in route numbers. At the community center, the chaos came in warm waves. Children called her name as soon as she entered. Crayons rolled, crackers were shared. Glitter ended up where glitter never should. Patrice, the coordinator, handed her a clipboard and a smile. "You bring the calm," she said. "Don't know how you do it." Ellen gave a soft shrug. "I've been invisible in louder rooms." During her break, Ellen checked her phone. No missed calls, no texts, but Brittany had been active on Instagram. 2 posts. The first, a latte in Sharon's manicured hand, sunglasses on, sitting pretty in the hybrid's passenger seat. Caption, "Mom deserves the best wheels." The second, a boutique selfie. Brittany and Sharon holding shopping bags, both beaming. Retail therapy with the Queen. Ellen stared at the screen for a moment. Then she thought of every ride she'd given in that car. Preschool pickups, casseroles delivered, emergency pharmacy runs, grocery lists and blanket drives and late-night phone calls that ended with, "Can you come get me?" Now the same seat held someone else's joy, and not a flicker of thanks. She turned the phone face down and walked back into the room where 2 kids were fighting over a paper crown. She separated them gently and handed each a glue stick. That evening, back in her in-law unit, Ellen heard the garage door creak open. Through the blinds, she saw Jason unloading shopping bags. Sharon stepped out of the passenger seat and adjusted her scarf like she'd just returned from Versailles. No one waved. No one checked in. Ellen poured boiling water over a tea bag, stirred in honey, and looked out the window. She didn't want the car back. She wanted them to realize who it had really belonged to all along. Her phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Appraisal appointment confirmed, Tuesday, 9:45 a.m. The title was still in her drawer. Folded, undisputed. She lifted her tea, watching the steam rise, calm as a judge. Some steering wheels don't turn when you twist them, but some hands never really let go of the grip. The tea had long gone cold in Ellen's hands, but she hadn't moved. She was still sitting by the window, the same one where she'd watched Sharon climb out of the hybrid with that air of casual ownership, like she belonged in the driveway more than Ellen ever had. The lights had dimmed in the main house, but inside the in-law unit, Ellen's world remained quiet, still, unsweetened. She could hear them laughing before she saw the lights go on. The noise filtered through the shared wall, clinking glasses, the scrape of chairs, Brittany's high-pitched laugh rising above the others like a bell someone kept ringing on purpose. Ellen reached for the remote and turned the volume on the TV up slightly. Not enough to drown anything out, just enough to feel like she'd chosen the noise she lived with. Her phone buzzed on the side table. A text from Jason. "Hey, we're hosting dinner for a few people tonight. Brittany's mom is cooking. Just letting you know it might be a little louder than usual." She stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering. Another message came in, like an afterthought. "Not sure we'll have space at the table tonight. It's kind of tight. Hope that's okay." Ellen didn't respond. She could hear them moving furniture, probably dragging in the extra leaves for the dining table. The irony bit deep. Not enough seating in the house she used to host Thanksgivings in. She thought of how many chairs she'd squeezed in back then, how often she'd eaten standing up just to make sure everyone else had a place. Now there wasn't one for her, not even in the corner. The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary floated through the vent. Someone was playing jazz on the Bluetooth speaker. Ellen recognized the tune. Her husband had loved it. Brittany probably didn't even know. She poured herself a bowl of soup from the small pot she'd made earlier and sat in her recliner, blanket over her knees. The show she was watching blurred into background static. Her ears strained against the wall unconsciously, catching bits of conversation, bursts of laughter, the occasional bark of a child asking for soda. Not one voice sounded like it missed her. There was a single knock on her door around 7 p.m. Not from Jason, not even from Brittany. One of the kids, sent down to drop off a plastic container with a dinner roll and half a serving of salad. "Mom said to bring you this," the girl mumbled. "They're doing cake soon." Ellen thanked her, closed the door, placed the untouched container in the fridge. After the girl left, Ellen sat back down, turned off the TV, and pulled her phone from the blanket beside her. She typed one sentence. "I'm heading out in the morning, early," sent it. No dots, no delay, just a single reply, thumbs up. She stared at it for a long moment. Not a word, not a question, just the universal digital shrug. Outside, the laughter continued. A cork popped. Brittany shrieked, "You didn't tell me it was bubbly!" Inside her unit, Ellen stood, crossed to the closet, and pulled down her old overnight bag. It still smelled faintly of cedar and laundry sheets. She didn't pack much, just what she might need for a single day. A cardigan, a novel, her folder of documents. The container of salad sat in the fridge, untouched. She thought about tossing it, then didn't. She poured herself a glass of water, carried it to her writing desk, and slid open the drawer where the car title waited. Still there, still hers, still signed. She ran a finger over the edge of it and closed the drawer without a sound. The overnight bag sat by the door, just as Ellen had left it. She didn't need it in the end, not for clothes at least, but packing it had served its purpose. Some departures didn't require luggage, just clarity. At 8:05 a.m., while the household upstairs still slept off their wine and flattery, Ellen stepped outside, keys in hand. The air smelled of jasmine and engine coolant. A mockingbird chirped twice and went quiet. The hybrid sat in the driveway, sleek, polished, oblivious. She slid into the driver's seat without hesitation. It still knew her. The seat adjusted automatically to her setting, the mirrors realigned to her shoulders, the Bluetooth offering to pair without asking questions. It had memory, even if her family didn't. She backed out, slow, quiet as vapor. No one saw her go. The dealership was 15 minutes away, long enough to savor the hum of the engine, the familiar turn of the wheel. Her husband had loved that car, not for its features, but for what it meant, that she could go wherever she needed, whenever she wanted. After he died, Jason had handed her the keys with a choked-up smile and said, "So you don't ever have to wait on anyone." She parked in the dealership's side lot and reached into her tote for the folder. Title, ID, maintenance records, and one crisp copy of the original purchase invoice with her name at the top. Inside, the sales floor gleamed like a luxury showroom, glass, chrome, and the faint scent of leather polish and burnt coffee. A young man in a slim navy suit greeted her. "Hi there, what brings you in today?" Ellen smiled politely. "I'd like to sell my vehicle. Private owner. Everything's in order." He blinked. "You're not trading in?" "No," she said simply. "I'm done with it." He walked her through the process. VIN scan, mileage check, light inspection. She sat calmly in the waiting lounge, watching a muted TV run highlights of a car chase in another state. The irony did not escape her. 25 minutes later, he returned with a clipboard and a tentative tone. Ms. Rosenthal, we've reviewed your documents. Car's in excellent shape for its age. We can offer $8,500. Direct deposit if you like. Same day? Yes, ma'am. Ellen nodded once. Let's do it. She signed the pink slip with a pen she'd brought from home, ink flowing smooth, no hesitation. The moment she lifted her hand, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not break, just shift. The young man offered to call her a cab. Or a rideshare, if that's easier. Rideshare, please. She watched through the glass as her former car was moved to the back lot, now tagged, logged, and stripped of memory. The Uber arrived, a silver sedan with crumbs on the back seat and pop music too loud. She didn't mind. The driver didn't ask questions. He didn't know he was chauffeuring quiet retribution. They passed a florist on the way back. She asked him to pull over and bought herself a single white lily. No occasion. No explanation. Back home, the driveway was empty. Jason's truck was gone. Sharon and Brittany, presumably, were still out being queens. Ellen placed the flower in a bud vase by the sink and changed into her slippers. By the time the clock hit 6 p.m., no one had noticed. No one had asked. It wasn't until 7:32 a.m. the next morning, as Ellen stirred cream into her coffee and opened the paper, that her phone buzzed. Sharp, fast, chaotic. Brittany. Where's the car? Then a second text. It's not in the driveway. Jason says he didn't take it. Please tell me you didn't park it somewhere weird. Ellen didn't respond right away. She sipped her coffee slowly, turned the page, and let the texts keep coming. Brittany texts again, panicked, incredulous. Where's the car? Ellen let the phone buzz itself out beside her coffee mug. The screen lit up again. Jason calling, but she didn't move. She watched the cream swirl into the dark roast like storm clouds rolling across calm water. Outside, the morning sun lit up the fence she'd once painted with her husband in matching straw hats. She finally reached for the phone. Didn't answer. Just cleared the screen. Jason's voicemail came in less than a minute later. Hey, Mom. Brittany says the car's gone. Did you park it on the street? Or maybe, look, just let us know, okay? She muted that too. By 8:12 a.m., there were 3 missed calls, 5 texts, and a next-door alert already up in the neighborhood forum. Urgent, missing car, gray hybrid last seen in our driveway, possibly stolen. Please check ring footage. Brittany R., homeowner. Ellen chuckled into her teacup. Homeowner, was it? The knock came next. Not tentative, not polite. Jason stood on the porch in his running shoes, face tight, breath short. His hoodie looked like it had been thrown on backwards first, then corrected. He didn't even say hello. Did you see anything weird last night? He asked. Like, someone in the driveway? Ellen blinked slowly. You mean the driveway I technically share? Jason didn't catch it. Yeah, that one. She stepped back, opened the door just wide enough for her words. Nothing weird. Just final. Jason's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? She reached calmly to the credenza behind her, lifted a slim folder from under the mail, and handed him the top page, bill of sale. Her name at the top, $8,500 in the final line, dealer's signature, notarized. He stared at it like it was written in code. You sold it? She nodded. To a dealership? Another nod. But you didn't ask us. It wasn't yours to be asked about. Jason's face flushed. But why? Mom, we said it was just for the week, just while Brittany's mom's in town. You said that, she corrected gently. You avoided the rest. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Ellen didn't fill the silence for him. Finally, he glanced down at the paper again, flipping it as if some hidden clause might save him. You sold it behind our backs? I sold it in plain sight, she said. You just weren't looking. Jason ran a hand through his hair. Does Brittany know? Not yet, but I imagine she's figuring it out in real time. On cue, Ellen's phone buzzed again. Brittany, we're calling the police. If it's not back in 15 minutes, I'm filing a report. Ellen read the message and smiled slightly. You should tell her not to waste their time. Jason was pacing now, stepping off the porch and back again like a man circling a problem he couldn't solve. I thought you liked having it. I did, Ellen said, until I realized what you were using it to say. Jason stared at her. You're really okay with this? I'm not only okay with it, Jason, she said calmly. I'm the one who made it happen. He looked like he might speak again, but didn't. Instead, he turned, walked down the path and disappeared around the corner toward the main house. Inside, Ellen closed the door softly, then picked up her coffee, now cooled to her liking. The phone buzzed once more. This time, a group chat lit up. Brittany. She's lost it. Jason. We need to talk about mental clarity. She's not being rational. Brittany. Seriously, like legal evaluation level. Ellen scrolled for a moment, then typed just one sentence before setting the phone down. You wanted the keys. You forgot who owned the ignition. Ellen turns her phone over and smiles. The dealership's transfer confirmation email dings into her inbox. Time-stamped, unshakable. Ellen didn't flinch as the dealership's confirmation email arrived, its subject line sharp as punctuation. Transfer complete. She let it sit unread while she rinsed out her coffee cup and wiped the counter with a slow, circular motion. On the other side of the wall, she could hear Jason's footsteps stomping down the hall, followed by the sharp slam of the sliding door. She didn't look up until the front door of the main house flew open like a courtroom objection. Are you serious right now? Brittany stood just outside Ellen's in-law unit, arms folded so tight they seemed to fuse into one angry shape. Her voice was sharp, clipped. You sold it? Without even telling us? Ellen stepped calmly into the doorway, towel in one hand. It wasn't yours to be told about. That car was part of this family, Brittany barked. It was supposed to help all of us, especially while my mom is here. Ellen raised an eyebrow. She seemed to be doing just fine in it. That's not the point. No, Britta, the point is that you asked me to take the bus. So I gave you what you asked for. Jason appeared behind his wife, looking like someone caught between a spark and a gasoline can. Mom, he said carefully, this just feels extreme. Ellen folded the towel and laid it over her arm like a server about to deliver truth. Jason, your wife made a request. I honored it. With finality, Brittany made a strangled sound. Oh, don't pretend this is noble. You're being petty, spiteful. No, Ellen said, her voice cool and spare. I'm being clear. Jason rubbed the back of his neck. There had to be another way. There was, Ellen replied. It was the way where someone knocked on my door and said, Hey, I know this was given to you. Would you mind sharing it for a few days? But that's not the way your wife chose. Brittany's mouth curled like spoiled cream. You know what? You're lucky I didn't report you for theft. Ellen's tone didn't change. Go ahead. Then I'll forward the notarized title, the signed invoice, and the transaction record. Should make for a colorful police file. Jason looked down. Brittany turned to storm off but pivoted at the last second. My mother is humiliated. Your mother can take Uber, Ellen said. Apparently that's what the rest of us do. That ended it. Brittany stomped up the path and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the mailbox. Jason lingered a second longer, then glanced at Ellen. You didn't have to blindside us. No, she said, but I needed you to see something. He didn't ask what. By dinner time, no one had spoken to her again. The house lights came on. Laughter from the television bled through the walls like weak tea. Ellen made herself a grilled cheese and ate it at the counter while listening to the evening birds. When she went to plug in her phone before bed, she noticed the notification. Brittany R. has sent you a PayPal request, $215, car drama reimbursement. There was no message attached, just the line item, just the assumption. Ellen stared at it for a full minute, then she tapped once to decline, and tapped again to block. The next morning, she passed Sharon in the driveway, standing near the mailbox in wedge sandals and a cashmere sweater. Her arms were crossed. You could have said something, Sharon muttered without looking at her. Ellen adjusted her tote bag. I thought I did. Sharon scoffed. So now what? I'm supposed to take public transportation? Ellen opened the mailbox with a soft creak. Welcome to the system. She walked back to her door without waiting for a reply. The sun warm on her back and the sound of her block's recycling truck rumbling like applause in the distance. That night, Ellen checks her email again. Another PayPal request from Brittany. This time, the subject line reads, "Car drama reimbursement. Final notice." Ellen ignored the email and went to sleep. The next morning, the PayPal notification was still sitting there. Same title, new tone, "Car drama reimbursement. Final notice." As if Brittany thought she could invoice closure. As if dignity had a price and Ellen was late paying it. Ellen didn't open the request. She didn't have to. She buttered her toast in steady strokes, the knife scraping over whole grain like a metronome. Calm, measured, finished. At 9:03 a.m., she tapped decline again, without hesitation. At 9:04, she blocked Brittany's PayPal account for good. By noon, the text from Jason came through. "Can we just talk about this like adults?" She stared at it for a moment, then typed slowly. "I did." The adults didn't like the terms. She left her phone on the charger and moved to the porch. It was a warm day, but not heavy. She sank her hands into the herb planters lining her patio edge. Basil, rosemary, a stubborn mint that had refused to die even when ignored. Across the fence, she could hear Sharon pacing. The deckboards creaked beneath her feet like a lazy metronome. Her voice carried, just enough to be heard but not quite quoted. Emotionally unpredictable. Boundary issues, just not stable anymore. Ellen didn't respond. She plucked weeds with surgical focus, every tug releasing a bitter, satisfying scent. By evening, she was sipping mint tea from her favorite mug when Joan strolled over, a thin folder tucked under one arm and a bottle of wine under the other. "They're not even subtle anymore," Joan said, settling into the opposite chair. "You might want to see this." Inside the folder were screenshots. Brittany's public Facebook comments, casually vicious in pastel font overlays. "Watching someone you love deteriorate mentally is heartbreaking. We're doing our best to support her even as things unravel." Prayers appreciated. Ellen scanned them in silence. "She's building a case without a courtroom." "She's building a fiction," Joan said. "But I brought the receipts." Ellen looked up. "You still want to update that paperwork?" Joan asked. "I do." They sat a moment longer, the porch lit only by a citronella candle, flickering between them. It smelled like late summer and old wars. Later that night, Ellen opened the old binder, Daniel's neat label still on the front, legal, personal. She flipped to the tab marked estate, her fingers calm now, no hesitation in her joints. Executor, Jason Matthew Rosenthal. Her pen hovered for a beat, just enough to grieve what could have been. Then she drew a single, silent line through his name. She pulled out a fresh copy of the form she'd already requested from her lawyer and filled it in. Executor, Claire Brennan, Joan's daughter. Practical, ethical, no nonsense. The kind of person who didn't flinch at long documents or short tempers. Claire had once organized a relief fund with 25 bank statements, 7 angry siblings, and 1 unstable uncle. She would do just fine. Ellen initialed every line, sealed the envelope with a slow press, and slid it into the lockbox beneath her bed. When she stood back up, her back cracked, her knees groaned, her spine reminded her it had lived a life. But her breath felt clean. She turned off the light and walked to the window. The hybrid was gone. The silence was hers again. Just before sleep, she whispered into the dark. Not bitter, not proud, just certain. Executor. Revised. Ellen tucks the sealed envelope into her lockbox. The lamp clicks off. Silence follows. Decisive, whole. The lockbox clicked shut like punctuation. Final, faint, unarguable. Ellen sat still in the dark for another few seconds, letting her eyes adjust to the certainty. The envelope was in place. The signature had dried. Her hand no longer shook when she held the pen. The power, it turned out, hadn't been in the steering wheel after all. It had been in the name on the line. The next morning, she slipped on her blazer, the charcoal gray one Daniel used to call her no-nonsense armor, and headed into town with purpose in every step. The bank first, then her attorney's office. Benjamin Hartman was already waiting when she arrived, a mug of stale office coffee steaming near his keyboard, and a folder labeled Rosenthal, E open in front of him. He looked up and smiled the way older attorneys do, too polite for surprise, too sharp to waste time. "Ms. Rosenthal, to what do I owe this honor?" "I need to update my living trust," Ellen said simply, "effective immediately." Benjamin arched a brow. "Executor change?" "Among other things." He opened a fresh form. "Tell me when to stop." Ellen leaned forward. "Remove Jason. Appoint Claire Brennan. No backup. She's it." He didn't ask why. Just scribbled in the new information and flipped to the financial section. "And these vehicle funds we've been holding?" he asked. "Redirect them," she said, voice steady. "Split the money evenly, 2 $4,000 donations, both to the same cause, emergency housing grants for women over 50, one local, one statewide." Benjamin's pen paused. "Do you want the donations to be anonymous?" Ellen considered that for a beat. "Number, I want the receipts to be mailed here. I'll frame them." He smiled. "You always had a touch of theater." "No," she said. "I just hate unfinished stories." The paperwork took 40 minutes. A notary arrived, witnessed the signatures, and quietly left. By 11:12 a.m., Ellen held everything she needed inside a crisp blue folder with gold lettering. Final directives, filed. On her way out, she passed a bulletin board in the lobby. A flyer pinned with a thumbtack caught her attention. "Housing stability isn't a privilege. It's a right." She took one copy, folded it neatly, and slid it behind her trust documents. On the drive home, she didn't play music. She just listened to the road. By late afternoon, she was back at her unit, tea steeping on the counter, and a calm spreading across her chest like heat from a vent. She took out the certified copy, sealed in its envelope, and added a post-it. "Jason, for your records." No anger, no accusation, just 4 words. It was the cleanest sentence she'd ever written. At twilight, she crossed the gravel driveway in her slippers. The main house loomed like a shell, too big for its contents, too empty in its truth. She walked past the flower beds Brittany never watered, past the decorative welcome sign Sharon had brought from Missouri, and up to the black iron mailbox bolted beside the porch. She slid the envelope in, closed the door, and didn't look back. Inside, Jason was probably just finishing dinner. Maybe still thinking there was time to fix it. Maybe still assuming control was a birthright. He wouldn't know that power didn't need volume. That sometimes it came in 8.5 by 11 paper. Ellen went inside and turned on her lamp. The room glowed gold and soft around her. She returned the lockbox to its shelf, lighter now, like it had exhaled. She sipped her tea. Then the front gate creaked. Jason stepping out to check the mail, unaware. She didn't go to the window. She didn't need to see him read it. Some things were meant to arrive sealed. Some locks weren't made to be picked. Jason stares down at the certified envelope, his name on it, but no idea what's inside. The envelope was still warm from the mailbox when Jason set it on the kitchen counter, unopened, like it might detonate if touched again. Brittany leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowed. "Do you think it's about the will?" she asked. Jason didn't answer. He just stared at the handwriting. His mother's, small and unhurried. The same hand that used to pack his lunches, pay his college deposits, cover his health insurance into his 20s. He finally opened it. He didn't speak for a full minute. Not until Brittany asked, "Well?" "She changed the executor," he said flatly. Brittany blinked. "To who?" "Claire Brennan. Joan's kid. A civil administrator." His hands were shaking, but it was his jaw that clenched hardest. Across the yard, Ellen refilled her bird feeder with sunflower seeds, her cardigan sleeves pushed up and a faint smile tucked into the corners of her mouth. The weather had turned crisp, just the way she liked it. She didn't know Jason had read the document yet, but she knew he would. And she knew what he'd try next. He tried it at 4:11 p.m. that Thursday. The call came from an unfamiliar number, his burner line from work. "Hi, Mom," Jason began, his voice straining for casual. "I was wondering if you needed help paying anything this month, like utilities or groceries. Just wanted to make sure nothing falls through the cracks." Ellen didn't miss a beat. "That's kind of you, but everything's handled." There was a pause. Then, I tried logging into the joint account, the one we set up for emergencies. It's no longer active, she replied, folding her laundry as she spoke. Jason coughed into the phone. You closed it? I redirected my finances to an advisor. It's more secure that way. Another pause. A sharper edge now. Mom, that account had access for emergencies. What if something happens and we need to step in? You already did, she said gently. When you stepped out. She hung up before he could find his tone again. By Friday, Brittany had started asking neighbors, offhand of course, if Ellen seemed off lately. She left breadcrumbs of concern wherever she went. She's just been so private, not like herself. One woman offered to bring over soup. Brittany declined, sighing. I think she just needs space. What Ellen needed was insulation. At her next financial advisory meeting, she authorized 2 final steps. All future correspondence required a secure password, and power of attorney would never rest with Jason again. Family can be complicated, her advisor noted gently. Not complicated, Ellen replied. Conditional. She spent Saturday organizing her receipts and shredding expired statements. The noise was satisfying, paper curling into ribbons like old promises dissolving. That evening, her voicemail icon blinked. It was Brittany. The message began upbeat, saccharine. Hi, Ellen. Just checking in. We haven't heard from you in a while. Hope everything's okay. Then came the pivot. I know you've made a lot of changes lately. It's been surprising. But if this is about the car or whatever, I really hope you're feeling powerful. A faint click followed. Ellen saved the message, filed it, and then deleted the notification. She stood in her small kitchen, tea steeping, a candle lit low by the window. Across the yard, the main house was quiet. Lights on, but no real warmth. She reached for her journal and wrote just one sentence under that night's date. Power isn't about control. It's about clarity. Then she turned the page. The voicemail still sat in Ellen's inbox, unheard and undeleted. She didn't need to press play to know what it contained. Tone wrapped itself into every syllable before a word was even spoken. But what Brittany didn't realize was that Ellen no longer stored heat in wounded places. Not anymore. Now she stored it in quiet rooms, in sealed envelopes, in the soft laughter of the only person who had bothered to knock that Saturday morning. Mia, 16 years old, braces freshly off, and sleeves half pulled over her hands like she was still learning what to do with them. She stood at Ellen's door in leggings and a college hoodie 2 sizes too big. No announcement, no parent in sight, just a knock, a pause, and a soft, "Grandma?" Ellen opened the door. Mia blinked. "Can I sit with you?" Ellen stepped aside without a word and gestured to the sun-warmed bench just outside the door. Mia took a seat. Her eyes flicked around the garden, then to Ellen, then down to her hands. "They're making it sound like you've snapped," she said quietly. "But I know you haven't." Ellen didn't flinch. "And how do you know that?" Mia looked up, voice firmer. "Because crazy people don't alphabetize basil tins or mail receipts in color-coded folders." Ellen laughed, a sound that caught her off guard. "They also don't keep journals of every birthday letter they've ever written to the grandchild," Mia added, pulling one from her tote bag. "I read this one last night. You told me that bravery sometimes looks like baking a cake when no one asked." Ellen's eyes softened. "That was your 7th birthday. You insisted on a lemon cake and no one else would eat it." "I made the same one last week," Mia said, "and I didn't share." They sat in a silence that wasn't heavy, but thick with years. Ellen studied her granddaughter's profile. There was Jason's nose, but Ellen's cheekbones, and something in her posture, quietly observant, like she was always half listening, reminded Ellen of her younger self. Mia glanced back toward the main house. "They talk about you like you're in the past tense, but I see you more clearly than ever." Ellen looked at her for a long moment, then stood. "Come with me." Inside, the room smelled of lemon polish and ink. Ellen crossed to the bookshelf and retrieved a slim leather-bound journal from the middle shelf. She handed it over. Mia took it reverently, thumbing through the pages without reading. "What is this?" "Family strength," Ellen said. Not the kind you put on Instagram, the kind you build when the lights are out and no one's watching. Mia's hands stilled. Is this for me? Yes, Ellen replied. It always was. I just waited until you were ready. Mia swallowed hard. Thank you. Ellen poured them each a glass of iced tea, adding mint leaves and a slice of orange. They drank on the porch as the afternoon wind stirred the trees and the garden seemed to lean closer. Do you think people change? Mia asked finally. People evolve, Ellen said. Change is what they do to please others. Evolution is what they do to survive. Mia nodded slowly. Before she left, Ellen handed her a small envelope with her name written in script. Don't open it now, she said. Open it when you need reminding. Mia tucked it carefully into her pocket. Then she turned, paused halfway down the path and turned back. I'm proud of you, she said. Ellen didn't respond, but her throat caught in a way that startled her. That night, Mia posted a single photo, with a caption, Respect has no expiration date. It was the two of them on the porch, no filters, just them, knees touching slightly, glasses of tea on the side table, Ellen mid-laugh. The next morning, the porch still smelled faintly of citrus tea. The cushion where Mia had been sitting held the shape of someone who finally felt heard. Ellen touched the edge of the now empty glass, as if to capture the echo of that moment. It had been a long time since anyone looked at her like she wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. It was earned, which made the next noise all the more predictable. The soft, syrupy tone of Brittany's voice floated over the fence later that afternoon, sugar-coated for the neighbor she was chatting with on the walkway. Ellen couldn't make out every word, but she caught the rhythm. Disappointment disguised as concern, spin dressed in civility. She's just not herself lately, Brittany was saying. We were all so shocked about the car thing. It wasn't about the money, it was just sudden. The neighbor said something back, too quiet to hear. Brittany responded just loud enough. It's hard, you know, watching someone spiral, especially when you've tried so hard to include them. Ellen didn't flinch. She watered the geraniums like she hadn't heard a thing. But that evening, when Joan dropped by to borrow a staple gun, Ellen recounted the exchange. She's laying the groundwork, Ellen said flatly. Joan rolled her eyes. For sainthood? For martyrdom. She's telling the story first. You gonna let her? Ellen didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled the latest HOA newsletter from the mail pile and tapped the open call on the back page. Resident Reflections. 1 page, 1 voice, 1 truth. The submission deadline was in 3 days. Ellen sat down at her old typewriter, not the sleek laptop Brittany had once tried to replace it with, and rolled in a fresh sheet of paper. The keys clicked like footsteps in a hallway. She didn't write long. She wrote clearly. Her essay was titled, Entitlement Isn't Legacy, and Silence Isn't Agreement. She kept it under 500 words, the limit. She never mentioned names. She didn't need to. She wrote about what legacy really was. Not what you left, but how you left it. She wrote about independence and how people weaponized it when they couldn't benefit from it. She wrote most of all about the difference between being remembered and being respected. She dropped the printed page at the community office the next morning. No envelope, no signature, just a straight spine and a half nod to the receptionist. By the time the new newsletter landed on doorsteps a week later, word had already gotten around. Joan delivered Ellen's copy with a grin and a bag of lemon scones. You're on page 6, bottom left. The essay was cleanly printed, sent. Arid, no edits. And under the byline, E. Rosenthal, resident since 2014. Later that day, during a walk around the block, a few neighbors waved differently, less tight-lipped, more thoughtful. Someone Ellen barely knew from the garden club murmured, "That was brave." Brittany said nothing, until the HOA email came through. Ellen opened it mid-morning, halfway through steeping a pot of chamomile. The subject line read, Nomination, Elder Council Leadership, Fall Term. The message was short, direct. Dear Ms. Rosenthal, your recent contribution to the HOA newsletter has been widely appreciated. In recognition of your long-term residence, insight, and advocacy, we would like to formally nominate you for the inaugural Elder Council leadership position. If interested, please reply by Friday. Sincerely, Gloria Maldonado, Board Chair, Sunset Park HOA. Ellen set down the mug before the tea spilled. She reread the message once, then again. Then she reached for her notepad, the same one where she used to log Jason's elementary school lunches, Mia's babysitting schedule, and Daniel's doctor appointments. She turned to a blank page and wrote the word "yes" on the notepad, tore the sheet neatly, and tucked it inside her cardigan pocket. It was barely noon, and yet the sun felt more golden than usual, like it was tipping its hat to her. For the first time in months, she wasn't reacting. She was initiating. She was choosing. And there was still more to do. The next morning, she stood in line at the women's shelter she'd quietly supported for years, once anonymously, then as an occasional volunteer. It was a 2-story brick building near the edge of town, with patchy grass, a mural fading in the sun, and a front desk that always smelled faintly of peanut butter and copier ink. Tucked beneath her arm was an envelope marked Transportation Fund, Restricted Use. Inside was $5,000. Clean, undivided, no strings. When the director Sheila opened it, her eyes widened. "Is this for us?" "For your women," Ellen said. "Bus passes, gas cards, Ubers to court, whatever helps them get where they're going without asking permission." Sheila blinked. This could fund 3 months of movement." "Make it 6, Ellen replied, sliding a second page across the table. "Vendor list. I called ahead." Outside, the city hummed along, unaware that a retired woman with a tote bag and no car had just given 12 strangers more freedom than most families do in a lifetime. Later that week, Ellen received an invitation to speak on a community panel called Aging with Autonomy, Stories from the Gray Line. The coordinator said they'd found her essay, looked up her name, and realized she wasn't just eloquent, she was experienced. "We'd love for you to talk about independence and financial self-determination," the woman said over the phone, "and how aging doesn't mean surrender." Ellen smiled into the receiver. "Tell me the time and place." It was held at the local library. Modest chairs, weak coffee, a podium with a mic that whined if you stood too tall. But the room was full, not just with seniors, but with adult children, social workers, even 2 women Ellen recognized from the shelter. She kept her speech short, but not soft. "I wasn't pushed out of the driver's seat," she said. "I stepped off and bought the road, because control isn't kindness, and comfort without respect is just decoration." Applause came, not thunderous, but honest, the kind that settles in your spine. Afterward, as she sipped lukewarm coffee and answered questions, she noticed a familiar silhouette lingering by the fire exit. Jason. He didn't wave, just hovered, watching her talk to others, nodding as if trying to graft himself into the moment. She excused herself, walked over, folded her arms. "You came," she said. He looked sheepish. "Saw the flyer in town. Someone said Mom Rosenthal was a local hero now." "Depends on who you ask." Jason shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Listen, about everything. I didn't mean for it to get so public. Brittany thinks this whole thing has become a little embarrassing." Ellen tilted her head. "Embarrassing for who?" He didn't answer, just glanced at the room, then back at her. "You didn't tell anyone I used to be your power of attorney." "I didn't have to," she said. "That page rewrote itself." Jason tried a smile. "Still, I was proud of the shelter donation, even told some folks at work." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. I didn't." He hesitated. "Maybe we could do an interview together? Like, tell our side? Reframe it?" Ellen pulled a folded note from her purse, one she'd written in anticipation of this exact moment. She handed it to him. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence in her cursive. "Public image is rented. Respect is earned." He looked up. "Is this a no?" "It's a boundary," Ellen said, walking away. Jason didn't follow her out of the library. That told Ellen everything she needed to know. He'd read the sentence. He just didn't want to respond to it in public. That, too, was familiar. Some messages aren't delivered for discussion. They're delivered for distance. The next morning, Ellen stood at her kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile, watching through her window as a silver taxi pulled into the driveway. Sharon came out first, dragging her roller bag like it had offended her. Brittany trailed behind, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a line. Neither looked toward the in-law unit. Ellen didn't wave, she didn't move, she simply watched. Sharon climbed into the back seat. The taxi idled for a moment, then rolled off down the street. Brittany didn't come back inside. She stood on the porch, phone to ear, pacing, then finally disappeared into the house without a single glance in Ellen's direction. Peace settled in like the quiet after rain, unapologetic, unbothered. By afternoon, a knock came. 3 soft raps that didn't carry entitlement. Ellen opened the door to find Jason, his posture tentative, hands in his pockets. "Just me," he said quietly. She stepped aside but didn't speak. He stood in the middle of the small living room, eyes on the couch, then the wall with the framed photo of Daniel holding baby Mia. "She's changed a lot," Jason said. "Mia, you probably saw the post." Ellen nodded once. Jason took a breath. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for letting things go the way they did, for not stepping in sooner." She met his eyes. "You wanted it both ways. Comfort and distance. That's not how family works." He didn't argue. After a beat, she nodded toward the door. "Close it gently behind you." He obeyed. That evening, she wrapped a small box in blue paper and tied it with a strip of muslin. Inside, a prepaid bus pass and a card. Her handwriting was firm and centered. "Always go where you're valued, and never be ashamed to leave where you're not. Grandma E." She walked the package across the yard to the mailbox and tucked it inside with a calm that felt earned. The moon rose early. Ellen lit a candle, flipped through her garden planner, then looked over at her coat hanging on the back of the chair. The dealership wasn't far. It wasn't about a purchase. Not this time. She pulled on her jacket, buttoned it slow, and slipped her ID into her pocket. Then she walked outside, locking the door behind her with a click that felt like punctuation. The air was sharp and clean. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Sprinklers hissed to life on the neighbor's lawn. Ellen turned left instead of right, following the curve of the sidewalk past the cul-de-sac, her pace steady, spine straight. She didn't bring a bag, didn't need to. 15 minutes later, she reached the dealership. It was quieter at night, most of the sales crew gone, just a security guard in a booth, and rows of cars lined up like soldiers under yellow halogen lights. She wandered between them, trailing her fingers across the cool metal, reading price tags without reaction. A red hybrid caught her eye, not unlike the one she'd sold, same shape, different color, fresh start. She didn't reach for the door. She just stood there for a long moment, letting the night settle around her, breathing in new leather, distant exhaust, and the faint scent of eucalyptus from the nearby planter. She wasn't shopping. She was surveying. The road hadn't ended. It had widened. Then steps back, not to claim it, but to consider what comes next. Ellen stood with her hand resting on the hood for a moment longer, not in longing, but in understanding. Not every vehicle was meant to be driven. Some were meant to be passed by, admired, and left behind. She turned, walked slowly back into the night, and didn't look over her shoulder once. At home, she brewed a cup of chamomile, flipped open her leather-bound journal, and settled into the chair by the window. The sky was velvet black, stars blinking like breadcrumbs in a story too big for one lifetime. She didn't need a plot twist anymore. She needed a closing sentence. She clicked her pen and began to write. "They taught me who I wasn't. I remembered who I am." Below that, she underlined the date. Exactly 1 year from the morning Brittany had asked her to take the bus. 12 months, 15 events, 1 woman. Later that week, the letter arrived. Ivory envelope, embossed return address from the women's shelter 2 towns over. Inside, a tri-folded note on thick stationery. Her name at the top. Her donation acknowledged in the center, but it was the last paragraph that made her hands still. "Thanks to your gift, 6 women were provided transportation to safe housing. Some rode to shelter, some rode to interviews, 1 rode home to get her children. You didn't just buy passes, "You bought safe passage." A quiet sound escaped Ellen's throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. She folded the letter neatly and slipped it into her journal, between the page marked Legacy and the one labeled Boundaries. A small smile tugged at her lips as she closed the book. Later that day, she stopped by the local printer, picked up 30 flyers for the senior panel she'd been invited to speak at. Title: Aging on Your Terms, Resources, Rights, and Rewriting the Story. The flyer listed her not as a former social worker, not as Jason's mother, but simply Ellen Rosenthal, advocate, donor, survivor of financial displacement. That night, she taped one flyer on the rec center board with thumbtacks that didn't bend. Across town, Jason and Brittany hadn't said much since Sharon left. The PayPal request remained unanswered. The mailbox stayed empty. Silence was their new form of punctuation. But Mia still texted. A picture of her school bus, a photo of the blue pass from her grandma tucked in her wallet. A caption: "Still going where I'm valued, just like you said." Ellen didn't reply. She didn't have to. Some lines echoed longer than any conversation. Sunday morning, she took her usual walk down Sycamore Lane, waving at the woman who ran the dog grooming van, nodding at the high school coach who always jogged at 9 o'clock sharp. Life was humming, ordinary and better for it. She stopped by the bus stop, not to ride, but to sit. She watched as others boarded, an older man with a lunchbox, a mother holding a toddler's sticky hand, a young woman with a haircut like defiance. Every one of them knew the bus wasn't glamorous, but it was freedom, and you don't apologize for freedom. When she finally stood, Ellen walked home with a different kind of stride, measured, sure, final. She paused at her mailbox to pull out the community newsletter she'd helped write. On the cover, "Seniors Leading the Way, Elder Council Appoints New Chairwoman." Inside, a half-page photo of her, mid-speech, at the panel podium. In her hand, a stack of donated bus passes. Behind her, a poster that read, "Independence is not negotiable." She placed the newsletter beside the shelter's thank you note, then reached for her journal one last time. She added one more line under her last entry, the ink clean and full. "They asked me to take the bus, so I bought the steering wheel."